This is another session of Ask Lloyd. And today I have a good friend of mine, an old friend of mine, Cherie Morris, who is a divorce coach, both locally and nationally. She is amazing at what she does. The name of her business is Dear Divorce Coach, and she is certainly a dear. And I'm very happy to have her here to help talk to us about gray divorce. So I guess the first thing I could say, or like the first question I have for you, by the way, welcome, is what is a gray divorce?
Hi, Lloyd. Thank you so much for having me today. And first of all, I will not take umbrage at calling me an old friend because you two are a dear friend. And yes, we are all getting older. So I think really when we think about gray divorce and what it is, we think about divorce in the 50s, 60s, and even further along on the age spectrum. And what it really means is we're getting to a place and stage where our life has maybe transitioned from having young children, from having a full-time career, to something different. And it's a stage we now see happening more frequently with people becoming less satisfied with their marriages at an older age.
Well, one of the things that I certainly see in people who come to talk to me are people who feel like their life is just not as satisfactory as it used to be. They just want more out of life. It's not working for them. What have you seen as, I guess, we continue along I guess, as long as we age, as we get older?
Well, it's an interesting note, Lloyd, and I'm really glad you brought that out first, because I think there are a lot of reasons we can be dissatisfied with ourselves. And sometimes it's easy to pin that on the marriage, right? So one of the first things I do as a coach is try to help people discern what's the source of the dissatisfaction. There are many categories, and obviously it's easy for all of us to blame a spouse, but let's do that work first, figure out what's going on with the individual before assuming that we need to leap to divorce.
Right. And I've seen a lot of people who come in there with the question, the proverbial, should I stay or should I go? At this, and I'm talking about the older set, and people have at least 10, 15, even 20 plus years of marriage together, and they're in a deep state of contemplation. They don't know. It's a difficult choice. Do people see you come to talk to you during those types of I guess that we'll call it the contemplative phase of divorce, if you will? I don't know if that's a term of art, but for our discussion.
They sure do, Lloyd. And the interesting note for me is that it's a really good time to do that work. In other words, don't already be decided if you can. When you're working with a coach, you're getting legal advice, I think it's important to think about a lot of categories, and you may not even understand all those categories because hopefully you don't do this all the time. But for people like us who do, I think it's important that people know we have resources to help them figure out this stage. And one of the things I do is look at a lot of categories of their life and ask them how each of those things are going. And also, how will they look if they do divorce? Sometimes, however, Lloyd, I see people who are just done, right? They know they want this. And it reminds me of a story my dad, who was a family law lawyer, told me once, which was, he was sitting with a couple who was married 60 years, and they said, we want a divorce. And he's like, look, you survived this long. Why can't you just stay together? And they said 60 years, but not one more day. Right. So yeah. I really like to think about people having time to discern and not already being done. But sometimes it is the case that one or the other spouse is already there. But if you can, let's think through possibility.
Right. And what are the topics that they are going to focus on when coming to a decision? For example, finances or family or other types of, I guess, intertwined lives that have to become unraveled. What do you talk to your clients about that?
Yes, I really love that you named two of the top categories. For me, finances leads the way. As we age, it's really important. We may have adapted to a particular lifestyle. Let's think about how it's going to look after divorce. No matter how able you have been to meet your needs and more, when you're dividing assets, it's less than that whole. Sure. So we really have to think about that. How is your health? Do you likely need support and care as you get older? Do you already have some need for caretaking? What are your children doing? How are they doing? How will they receive you? What's your relationship like with them now? How will it look afterwards? Again, these are not all deciding factors, but they're important categories if you haven't thought about them. And I think, if I may say, the most important category I see is, how are you doing with your own relationship with self? Do you think ending your marriage will solve all your problems? Because it just doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do your other relationships look like? Do you have good friends? Do you have a community of people? It's one of the greatest factors we see now in recent studies that determines how you will do later in life.
Well, I've seen a lot of clients come to me and they're talking about how their spouse has sort of isolated them from a lot of other people, kind of cutting off their support networks, etc. So I know my clients have a lot of difficulty in that respect as well when they get to this point. Have you seen
That's
something like that, Jim?
that's really important, Lloyd. And I'm really glad you looked at it through the other side of things, right? I'm talking about what's your role in that, but it is often true, or not often true, sometimes true, that you can be in an emotionally abusive relationship in which you're gaslighted, isolated, not treated as you should be. And certainly if that's occurring, then we want to address those root issues. And one of the things I often ask is, have you tried to get help for that? Have you considered relationship coaching or therapeutic intervention? Because people develop patterns, right, in relationships. So your spouse may clearly be abusive, but it may also be they thought they were meeting your needs and don't know how, because they have their own, barriers to success.
And as far as, I guess, what we consider gray divorces, are we talking about strictly empty nesters, or just people who are, getting close to that phase, or, post empty nest period?
Well,
Or
as you know, Lloyd, people have children later and later now, so
Sure.
you don't necessarily have to be an empty nester well into your 50s, late 50s, or even 60s. And also, there's a generation of kids returning home, especially during pandemics. So gray divorce can really be people with children, either, teenagers or adults living at home. So in general, I think we think of it as a life transition that occurs once we are empty nesters, but I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore.
And one of the other things that I've noticed, and again, I don't know if it's just anecdotal or for where I happen to be, sitting here in my law practice, but the pandemic had some effect on perhaps accelerating marriages that are going to end. In other words, it may have been there all the time, the whatever fundamental faults there may be in the marriage where it's not really working out, but the pandemic, being locked down together, may have been an accelerant towards ending these relationships. Have you seen that as well?
Absolutely. And I guess it really doesn't take a lot of deep thought to think about why that may be, right? You're
Right.
exacerbating the very circumstances that led to the difficulty. I do also see people who are more willing to dig in and do the work of that relationship, because now they recognize what the dynamic is, but also some are no longer willing to tolerate it, in part because a global pandemic teaches all of us, right, that our time on this earth is limited and we may want to take advantage of it. I don't see a divorce as the be all and end all, right, and the way to solve that problem, but I do think it's an area that deserves discernment and consideration.
And one of the things, I always feel like I have a special affinity towards coaches, because I've learned from the best of them, how they do it, and it's just nice to be able to have a friendship or a professional relationship with a coach, because one of the things that I try to do also with my clients is just explain to them that it's going to get better. I mean, I can't say this is the coaching certificate, but I definitely feel like I'm in a good position to talk to my clients about how things will get better, no matter how dark these days may be and seem, as they're coming into the divorce. In other words, it gets harder before it gets easier, and that's really difficult for a lot of people. So. Mhm.
Lloyd, you're so right. And one of the things I notice about my clients, seeing hundreds and hundreds of people, that it is up to the individual to do the work, right? So a mindset shift is so important. And that's the tools we bring as coaches to people. And then you have to be willing to dig in and do it. So it's to your credit, to everyone, that has ever done this work. And I am also a divorcee, repartnered with a blended family. And there are still pain points, but the bottom line is you have to be willing to use the tools presented and figure out what is next and best for you. And I think this might be most critical, and I'm really glad you raised this topic, not continue to live in relation to your former spouse if you decide to divorce. And that's a difficult thing to do sometimes, because you want to kind of blame everything that's happened to you on that marriage. And
Sure.
ultimately, we are all responsible for ourselves and to take care of our children. So I think it's a critical piece. It's how we shift that mindset is up to us. And yes, coaches can be instrumental in that, I think.
And I definitely want my clients to know that there are other providers out there, such as coaches, such as therapists, psychotherapists, trauma therapists, other people who are going through really, really difficult times, even groups for that matter, and other support groups that people could talk to. And I just find it really, I guess there's a lot of services that are out there that can be obtained if you really look for it and ask the right questions of the right people.
And I think it's important, Lloyd, to note that we have to rely on legal advice as we get a divorce. It's an important part. We're dealing with the government, right?
Sure.
And it may not be the most important point. And I mean by that, you're a terrific lawyer, you're going to do a good job for people. But sometimes the legal path is not what solves your problems, right? So many of us need more than that. And that is the emotional wellness. So yes, therapists can be great. I particularly find therapy is good for looking back and figuring out what maybe you came from that was not working. And coaching is particularly good at giving you tools for looking forward. How do you make this next moment better? How do you weather this life transition, which is what divorce really is, to do better for you and your children, whether they're adults or still minors?
Right. If I would make any recommendation to my clients, it would be get the support you need. Don't just sit there and brave it on your own. I mean, if you can, and a lot of people want to, but hey, listen, it is like you said, the legal problems are sort of just the tip of the iceberg, because it's not just the legal problems that you're dealing with. It's the rest of the holistic approach. It's the mindset that one's in. Maybe it's a cycle of negativity. Maybe it's a cycle of despair or just hopelessness or fear. And that's what I think, I want to bring to the table, so my clients who are going through these, this very difficult time, and they, whenever we're doing the divorces, very few of them, I would say, are easy. I mean, some may be easier than others, but, the degree of difficulty that people go through, I've seen a lot. And I know that to take it on yourself is sometimes for a lot of people just too much.
And if I may just make a plug for self-care,
Sure.
I haven't said it explicitly, but it's one of the most important things. Don't be afraid to be good to yourself. Figure out what you enjoy and engage in that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're deciding whether to go through a gray divorce, are forced to go through a gray divorce, or just happened upon this podcast and are hearing about gray divorce, all of us, I think, can do a better job of self-care, because it helps us feel better in any situation. And I think, particularly in this region, but really all over, it's sometimes hard to take those breaks, do things like meditate, exercise, do activities we enjoy, read a book, have time with a friend. But those things all help our mental health, help our emotional regulation, and we do better for ourselves, for our children, and even with a former spouse.
And that's one of the things I always like to say to my clients. I like to say, the ones with children, at least, make sure you do everything you can to protect the relationship with the kids. No matter how old they are, they don't have to be babies anymore. They don't have to be, whatever, they tweens or young. We're talking about no matter how old you are, you got to maintain that relationship and, and avoid, if to whatever extent you can, or try to insulate yourself from some possible negativity being thrown at the kids from your counterpart. So that is something I also see sort of in the later stages. When I say later, the older divorces, the gray divorces, there's an attempt to, I guess, get the kids on a kid or kids on your side and try to get alliances with the children against the other one. And that's just so horrible when I see that.
It's terrible. And it's really the data we have in divorce about kids is this, Lloyd. Mm-hmm. If you have conflict, that hurts the kids. So I want to say that again, because I think listeners need to know. If you have conflict, not if it's your fault, if you're to blame, but if you have conflict, that's what hurts the kids. And that means don't bring it to them. So even if you really think it's important that your spouse is at fault, that they've ruined your life, that's yours to deal with. Your children still want to and deserve to be able to love their other parent. Period. End of story.
I know that is difficult for a lot of people who really believe whatever they believe. I mean, I'm sure when these parents turn around and vilify the other one, the other parent, they're not trying to hurt the kid, but they believe it, and that's what's really, trying. And I feel as though, at least I'm in a place to give not only legal advice but life advice. And sort of what you're saying, Cherie, just don't do it. Just somehow separate that out and compartmentalize or whatever it has to be, but just separate the relationships that you have between the ex or the soon-to-be ex and the children at any age.
Definitely. And that's why people like divorce coaches exist, because we can help you with that work. We can help you hold it. We can help you shift your mindset. We can help you dig in and figure out how that looks for you going forward without the need to, the term is often called parentification, where a parent turns to the child and looks to ask them to hold their stuff. And I see it all the time. And so trying to shift that dynamic's really important for your children, because they will be more functional as young adults long into their own relationship lives.
Because this is really practical information. I mean, I think a lot of what we're saying can be helpful to a lot of people.